Welcome, everybody, on this rainy Friday morning. I think at least it's Friday. One can never be certain these days what day of the week it is. Let me get situated here real quick, and then we are ready to roll. So today we are going to talk about language assessment in this new remote environment. And as mountain climber Alex Honnold, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but as he stated, I took a test once. They said I was a genius. So let's hope that our students all feel the same way and that we feel the same way when we give assessments to our students. So what we want to talk about today is how we can move our face-to-face assessments into this new online environment, what we need to do to adjust any existing assessments that we would like to maintain and keep in our class for the rest of the semester. I'll briefly talk about task and project-based language learning as one option for assessment. Then we'll go a little bit over how you can collect written and spoken work in the target language. We'll discuss a little bit what you can do, best practices for grading and feedback, then a couple of notes on prelims and final exams, and then we have one slide with additional resources where you can find out more information about assessment in general and tools and resources that might be useful for you as you think about assessment in this new remote environment. So we have three guiding principles for remote instruction and assessment that we think that everybody should think about and remember, and they are flexibility, generosity, and transparency. So it is crucial in this environment now that we are flexible, that we don't just hold on to what we've been doing because it's been always the way that it's worked. We need to be mindful of the situations our students find themselves in. As we've been saying throughout all these webinars, this is a very emotional and anxious, anxiety-inducing time. So we need to be flexible, I think, with our teaching, with our assessment, with ourselves, and with our expectations for our students. Generosity, just be kind. Keep in mind that our students are in different physical locations, different emotional spaces. So rethinking how we teach and how we assess will be really important to make sure that we best support our students in this new environment. And then something else that we've always been pushing is transparency and just being explicit, explaining exactly what we are doing, why we are doing it, and how we are doing it. What are the expectations? What do students need to do to take a test or to complete an assignment or an assessment? We've been talking about this for the last 3 weeks at length as well. Consider your pedagogical goals and expectations. That's what really needs to drive your assessments. Think about how you weight your assessments. So right now you might have certain categories, 20% attendance, 20% for unit quizzes, 15% for some kind of a role play or something like that. So look at those categories and rethink, does that still make sense? Will I still do these paper-based end of unit assessments, or am I going to shift? And if you make any changes, make sure that you are transparent about that. Tell your students, how are you changing things? Why are you changing them? Because of course they are very concerned about their grades overall. Also think about the feasibility of the assignments that you had planned for the rest of the semester, and think if they're actually still feasible in this new remote environment. If you have lengthy paper-based tests, those might not be the way to go. Those might not be what really best supports our students and actually measures what they can do in the target language. I think for lower level language classes, this is actually a wonderful opportunity to shift in general toward more of a focus on proficiency. We all know that really languages can't be graded, right? A language, when you use language, it's not right or wrong. As you're developing your proficiency, students move at their own pace, and there is never this benchmark that they get graded against, like maybe in some other subject areas like science and math. So I think this is actually an opportunity for all of us to rethink how we assess our students and really focus more on what our students can do and how they can show their proficiency in the target language. Something that will be really important in this new environment is that we diversify and distribute our assessments. So our recommendation, and actually the university recommendation, is to limit the number of high-stakes summative assessments, move toward more formative assessments, and then, as I just mentioned, really ensure, and this is, I think, especially important for the languages, choose assessments that enable our students to show what they can do. So I want to take a quick step back here and make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about formative assessment and summative assessment. We could be talking about assessment for weeks. We could be talking about project-based learning and task-based learning for weeks as well. So today this is all going to be just a very quick, we're touching on many different pieces. If anybody has any follow-up questions, you're always welcome to reach out. But here's a nice little overview of formative versus summative assessment. Many times, especially again in other content classes, there is a lot of focus on summative assessments. So that really evaluates student learning. It looks at some kind of standard or benchmark. This is usually very high stakes and the focus is on the outcome. I think in languages, we already always or generally do a lot more formative assessment because we use the assessment pieces to monitor student learning. So we help them identify their own strengths and weaknesses, and that then can guide us in our pedagogical approach of how we plan our lessons. Formative assessments are usually lower stakes, simply because there usually tend to be many more of those rather than having one final paper that's 50% of the overall grade. These formative assessments, you usually piecemeal your points together over the course of the semester. So we focus on the process of learning. And this is really the recommendation, to think more about formative assessments, giving students the opportunity to show what they can do, reducing anxiety because they know they have multiple opportunities to showcase that they have understood the content and that they can, in our case, utilize the target language. So we talked about diversifying assessments. That means, again, just more assessments and more frequent. That would be the ideal case scenario, rather than just thinking about what's the final prelim that is going to be a big chunk of the overall grade for the students. Something else that I think we should consider is, can we make assessments asynchronous? So rather than having a proctored online sit-down exam where you are watching the students and they have a very limited amount of time to respond to multiple choice questions, think about ways how you can offload some of the assessments, some of the ways for students to showcase what they can do outside of the face-to-face synchronous Zoom meetings that we have. I think our underlying principle really should be that we need to give students multiple opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge, and also in different mediums. So for language, of course, we want them to showcase that they can speak the language, that they can maybe write in the language, that they have listening comprehension skills, that they have reading comprehension skills. So just try to think of ways how students can demonstrate what they can do in various ways. One other consideration that I want you to think about is, in terms of assessments, what needs to take place in class where you are present, where you can maybe provide ongoing feedback, and what are some options for assessments that can take place out of class asynchronously. So for out of class, of course, one easy thing, if you are doing writing, or if your students have to, if you work with a non-Roman alphabet, things like that, students can practice offline and then share that with you. I think naturally producing the language is going to be something that will take place in class. There are ways for students to record their voice, record their image as well, that they could do asynchronously and then share. So just think about what really, what's important, what do you want your students to be able to showcase in these assessments, and then tailor the assessments toward that. One thing that some of my colleagues at different institutions who already started teaching a few weeks ago have been doing, especially in upper level courses, they structure each lesson in such a way that students are asked to do a pre-writing activity before class. Then in class, they build on that in collaborative writing environments through shared documents. And then the plan to showcase their growth in writing is to do some kind of a final presentation based on some research that they have done related to the topic that they were writing about. So think about how you can scaffold the assessments to enhance the ultimate pedagogical goal. One thing that is really effective that I think a lot of you are already doing anyway in some way, shape, or form is allowing students to chronicle their learning progress via a portfolio. That doesn't necessarily have to be like a beautiful online web page or a physical portfolio, but just think of ways like little stepping stones of how students can showcase that they are developing the different skill areas, that they have an understanding about the target culture. So think about how that can play into your assessment practices as well. One other quick note, and I don't think this is as relevant for languages as it is for other subject areas. When you assign some reflective pieces or some writing assignments or even some speaking assignments, don't make all of your assignments about the pandemic. I think a lot of classes tend to monopolize this topic right now because it's on everybody's mind constantly. But think about if our students have 3 different classes every day, and in every class, the reflective writing assignment in the evening that day is to write about the impact of COVID-19 on the target culture, on agriculture, and on law. They will never get away from this topic. So I think if you can be creative and think about happy thoughts, happy assignment topics that students can work on, don't harp on this pandemic topic as a content piece for assignments or assessments. So when we think about the existing assessments that you had planned, here are some thoughts about adjusting them. So leverage the technology. All of our students are sitting at their laptops or are using a mobile device to connect to class. So utilize Canvas for different assessments. The quizzing and assignment functions in Canvas are fantastic depending on how you set those up. A lot of the things can be auto-graded. There is also a nice, easy file upload where you can easily comment on what students have been doing. And the Center for Teaching Innovation has been offering and continues to offer really good workshops on how to utilize quizzes and assignments. So if you usually do a beginning of unit or end of unit check-in test, that's something that can easily be put into Canvas. Canvas is also excellent because it allows you to track engagement. And as I just mentioned, you can very easily give feedback. So one thing that we've been stressing as well throughout these webinars is that it's important to check in with your students. And in Canvas, it's like Big Brother is watching you. You can see exactly how many minutes or hours a student has been online in this learning management system. And so if you notice that some students don't put in the amount of time that they should, you can follow up with them, send them an email in your feedback, just tell them, give them some advice on what they can do to make sure that they make the most out of their time for your class. One thing, we've talked about this already as well, in Zoom you can project or share assessments. So for most of you, probably all of you, at one point in your teaching career, you probably used an overhead projector, and Zoom basically is the virtual equivalent of that. So you can project onto the screen whatever you want your students to see. So one option for completing or assigning an assessment or doing a quiz is you could simply show it on your screen, share it with the students that way. And then maybe to mix things up, if there is a written portion to that, have them take pen to paper and write out the answers. They can then snap a picture and put it in the Dropbox for you. Or you could also share, of course, they can also type it in a Word document, or in Canvas already, share it and upload it that way. Or you can share a PDF, a Word document, or an interactive Google Doc with the existing assessment, and then students can complete it that way. This is, of course, assuming that all your students have access to Google Docs. If you have students who had to return to their home countries, we just added a note on our FAQ page about students who are living internationally now, where certain US-based services may be blocked. So if you go to our preparedness website, we are linking to resources that our colleagues at the English Language Support Office have put together. So look at that. But in general, assuming your students are within the US, Google Docs are really great, not only for collaborative assessments, collaborative writing for students, but also to give chapter tests or unit tests or assessments. You could create individual instances and name them by each student, for each student, and then share each individual file with each individual student, and then either synchronously or asynchronously have them work on that, and you automatically get all of their responses and you can see exactly what they wrote and what they changed. I quickly want to touch on cheating when we talk about assessments. I think we should assume that our students may try to cheat. So that's just, we can't monitor them in the same way for high stakes assessments as we can if they sit in a classroom where we can space them out, social distancing, right? Great. So I think what we need to do instead is readjust how we assess our students and formulate more open-ended questions. So rather than yes, no, or multiple choice questions where students possibly can just Google the answer, have them actually showcase what they know and recontextualize and articulate what they know rather than checking checkboxes. If you are utilizing the quizzing or assignments features in Canvas, you can randomize question order, or within a multiple choice question, randomize the answer options. There are different ways how you can set that up, assuming this is the type of testing that you are doing, and assuming that you give a lot of time and you are afraid that students might be sharing, that one student in class goes in and takes the exam and writes everything down. Something else that you can do to reduce dishonest behavior for assessment types and tests like that is if you create a question pool and then only draw a subset that will be randomized, so every student would see a different kind of test, basically. Of course, that would mean that you would have to create more questions. But if you think about, if you have an end unit test where you usually have, you have your listening comprehension with like 5 questions, and then you have some kind of reading comprehension with 5 little questions, and you do some vocabulary work and maybe some grammar questions and some things about culture. You already have a whole set of questions. Just reduce the number of questions that you present to your students, and that way you can still utilize all the materials that you already created. Should we break for questions at this point, or should I keep rolling?
Let's keep rolling. We have one or two questions,
Okay.
and I'm sort of categorizing them. I think we should handle them at the end then.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Sam. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are books and dissertations that are written about assessment, about task-based learning, about project-based learning. But I quickly wanted to remind everybody about some of the hallmarks of task-based language learning. So of course, this is preaching to the choir. We know that language is learned best through interaction. And tasks really are the quintessential communicative event in contemporary language teaching. Tasks always involve the expression and interpretation of meaning, and they have a purpose that is not language practice, right? So when we think about drilling pronunciation or something like that, or we're asking students to do certain things that are very repetitive, that is not a task. That's an exercise or an activity. And if we want to improve our students' pronunciation, for example, or if we want to make sure that they know the perfect stroke order of characters, that's important. That's practice that should happen outside of the classroom. So in the classroom and in our assessments, we should always consider the context, the pedagogical goal. And I think task-based language learning really can help structure our teaching and our assessment, because this will allow our students to articulate what they can do with the language. So there's a specific structure. Students will need to know how to start, what is the ultimate goal, why am I doing this? And this will really help them take what they're learning, take what they know, and apply their proficiency in a meaningful way. So if we think about a few task examples, many times on the family unit in our textbooks or our materials, we ask our students to describe our family. That's really more of an exercise. A task on the same topic would be to create a list of family birthdays, plan activities around that birthday, and then think about what gifts we're going to buy and what cake we're going to make given a specific budget. So this is something where it's not just about saying, I have a brother, I have a father, I have a dog, right? Students have to create with the language. They have to think about a larger piece, a larger task, and then utilize the language for that task. Or when we think about food, a task would be to survey classmates what's in their refrigerator, and then think about, well, what does that say about my peers' personality, their health, their habits, and their lifestyles. So rather than saying, I like pizza and I eat spaghetti for dinner, create a task that goes beyond just practicing vocabulary items and structures that students know. Or when we think about restaurants, for example, going out to eat, many times we do role plays where one student is a server and another student is a guest in a restaurant. That's really not an activity that will ever happen to our students unless our students are servers in a restaurant. So that's not the context of the classroom. So something that we could do instead is write a review for a restaurant that they visited in their local community, or in our case now, something that they've ordered on Grubhub, and then create a web page to share the review or multiple reviews with the community. So just focusing on these tasks that go beyond just practicing individual vocabulary items or grammatical structures. Now, project-based learning is taking that one step further. Basically, project-based learning is task-based learning on steroids. Project-based learning comes out of the sciences. It's been a very popular approach in learning in sciences and history. So students respond to some engaging and complex questions. Project-based learning always assumes ability with language. So projects are particularly suitable for upper level language classes, or something that you work on for the end of the semester. So the intent for project-based learning is not necessarily to practice language per se. So with task-based learning, we do want to, the specific tasks we give our students, that is something where they are utilizing the language in a larger context. With a project, the focus obviously is on the project. Some examples that colleagues have used successfully in language classes, they had students create pamphlets. So they had to research some specific topic related to the course at hand, and then basically practice their written skills, their researching skills, their reading skills to create a pamphlet. Creating Wikipedia pages on maybe on an author that you have discussed, or on a piece of music that you're discussing from the target culture. Scripting and filming a documentary. Students they tend to get very creative when it comes to multimedia projects. Similar to the pamphlet would be creating a collage. Students could conduct a survey or an experiment where they look at a particular issue at hand that's related to your course. Maybe for language classes, this could be tied to living abroad, studying abroad, moving abroad, or something like writing lyrics to music. So those have been some specific project examples. Again, I think with projects, usually they're much more complex and require higher level language skills. So tasks are usually more suitable for lower level language courses. And then as we move up in the proficiency, then we can turn toward project-based language learning. We've used this slide before when we talked about communication. Just as a reminder here, if you think about how can you collect written and spoken work in the target language, you can certainly do a lot synchronously in real time when you see the students, but also a lot of it can be done asynchronously. And again, I think something that we should consider is, are we going to use the synchronous time for specific assessments, or are we utilizing the synchronous time on Zoom for our students to practice the target language and get feedback from us? So here is the overview again of what you can do synchronously and asynchronously, both for written and spoken communication. Again, Google Docs, our learning management system in Canvas, various features in Zoom will allow you to synchronously practice writing, the traditional essay or other Canvas assignments where students can write offline, file sharing via sending you a Word document, and lots of opportunities for spoken practice, of course, in Zoom, in breakout rooms during office hours, depending on how you connect with your students. We have some colleagues who utilize WhatsApp with their students rather than Zoom, or now in addition to Zoom. Asynchronously, students can easily record their voice, again, on the learning management system or on their device. And there are a number of applications and platforms that are excellent for both written and spoken written and spoken production. If you have any questions about those, we are happy to do follow-up webinars or touch base with you individually. Again, as a reminder, now is not the time to overwhelm yourself with new tools or your students. Stick with what you know, and then plan ahead for future semesters of how you could utilize some of these tech tools in addition to your face-to-face teaching. Moving on to grading and feedback. So I just want to reiterate here real quick the difference between grading and assessment. So grading, we really evaluate the individual student's learning and performance. So this is like summative assessment. When we talk about assessment, this is more formative. We are looking at what we can do to help improve our students' learning. So basically, feedback is a formative way to allow our students to get a better sense of where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are, and what they still need to do to meet their goals. When we think about grades, so you may adjust the weighting of your course and the different categories and the assignments. if you make any changes, reassure your students about grades in general. They're all very concerned. They want to make sure that they end the semester at least with grades intact. We have the satisfactory, unsatisfactory option for all courses now, and this is left up to each individual student. They have until April 21st to decide. This is also the extended drop deadline. So if students do decide to get a letter grade, reassure them about the grades. And this is where it is so important that you diversify your assessments. If right now one component is 50%, maybe reconsider that. Students are already really anxious, and if we distribute our grading and the assessment pieces a little bit more, they have more opportunities. And if they completely bomb one assessment, then it's not that big of a deal. Providing ongoing feedback, and whether that is synchronously and also ideally asynchronously, is very important for our students. It provides them structure. They have a better sense of where they are and where they need to go. It reassures the students that this is not only, we're talking to a screen, even though we have videos on that screen too. It's a very impersonal environment. But reading your feedback and knowing that you actually take the time to look at their work and provide feedback is reassuring to students and adds value. And it also helps build a sense of community. So students know that they're not just by themselves at home at their laptop, but on the other end, you are actually there and you are engaging with their coursework as well. If you are familiar with the Speed Grader or the Canvas Stock Viewer, this is a really nice tool to annotate online assignment submissions in Canvas. We're not going to go into much detail on this today here. There are lots of tip sheets and resources that the Center for Teaching Innovation is offering. But if you are thinking about written assignments, for example, that students upload, there's an easy way from within Canvas to provide feedback to your students directly. And that way you keep everything in the learning management system, and everything again becomes one-stop shopping, and students know for feedback to just go back there and check what you have submitted for them. So moving into prelims and final exams. This is something that a colleague of mine shared with me that I think is actually a perfect flow chart to think about. Do I really need to put my exam online? So is it yes or no? If yes, then again, everything needs to focus around our learning outcomes, right? If we are maintaining the online exam, then we might have to reweight how things are being done. Again, we talked about diversifying and distributing. If we don't have to do this big final online prelim exam, whatever, can we redesign it in alternative formats? If yes, then here are some suggestions. For example, students can create video presentations, write reflection papers, or a culminating written paper. If there really is no option for an alternative format, then, well, I guess you have to keep the exam. Then this flowchart is asking you to reconsider. Are you really sure? And maybe you can actually redesign, so it pushes you back up to the alternative format. And so if you are deciding, no, I have to do this final exam, then digitize it and think about what you can do and how you can diversify in that scenario. So let's talk about some of these ideas in a little bit more detail here. So for prelims and final exams of any nature, I think our primary concerns are to assess how well students have achieved the key learning objectives. So have they met our pedagogical goals that we have set for our course? We also should determine what objectives are still unmet. And what we want to also ensure with assessment is that we create an inclusive and accessible learning experience for students. And not only a learning experience, but that we also are inclusive and accessible in our assessment practices. Our colleagues at Michigan State have put together a really nice document about approaches for adjusting final exams or prelims. And they go over 3 different areas 3 different types of exams in order of what they think you should consider. So as we've already been talking about here today, ideally you will offer multiple lower stakes assessments. If that is not a possibility, then maybe if you have to do a final exam, consider making it an open note exam or something where students are allowed to still research answers online. And only if you really have to hold on to it, stick with the online proctored exam. So for the multiple lower stakes assessments, again, this allows students to demonstrate their understanding more frequently throughout the remainder of the semester. It reduces anxiety and gives students more practice with the target language. And research has actually shown that it is a more effective method for incentivizing participation and reading. And the link here will take you to the research study that supports this finding. Another research study has shown that multiple lower stakes assessments encourage knowledge retention because each assessment ideally builds on the last. When we do think about open note exams, this of course would allow the students to refer to the internet or any of their materials while they take the exam. Research has shown that this, look at this is not English, incentives academic honesty. It incentivizes academic honesty and decreases anxiety. Again, exams are a very stressful situation. Now think about the remote environment. Now think about maybe you're only giving the students 30 minutes. So there is anxiety upon anxiety upon anxiety. So if you do need to hold on to a traditional final exam or prelim, consider at least making it open note. It's also good for collaborative work and has shown to promote critical thinking skills if you allow students to utilize their notes. And also something to consider if you stick with open note exams, revise your questions from factual recall to application of concepts, right? We've been talking about not just doing multiple choice questions, but actually asking students to answer open-ended questions so that you can gauge, have they really understood a concept? Can they really apply a certain grammatical structure outside of the very typical rote memorization that they've done? And then also research has shown that using multiple select items to assess multiple levels of complexity and comprehension is beneficial in decreasing anxiety and in allowing students to really showcase that they have understood a concept. So overall, as a reminder, I think with final exams, with assessments in general, we need to be flexible. If you are sticking with a final exam or with any kind of higher stakes assessment option, consider if you can make these options untimed. On Canvas, you have lots of opportunities and options to release a test at a certain time, have it visible for a certain amount of time. And I think in order to be accessible for all students, we really should consider not having time limits on these exams. Of course, there has to be a cutoff point at which point students have to complete something. But usually if students would complete a final exam during a 60, 50, 45-minute class session, think about giving them the entire day to do it. That way they can structure their time, their own time around this. Something else that we do a lot in language classes is having final group presentations or projects. Reconsider this. This remote environment is not very conducive to having students collaborate. There are ways for them, of course, to do that in Zoom breakout rooms or offline, but it might be easier for students right now to simply work on assignments themselves, or give them the option to say, if you want to work with a peer and you want to find a partner, you can do that, and you can have up to 2, 3, 4 students in a group. But leave that up to the students, how they want to showcase what they have learned and what they can do with the target language. One suggestion from colleagues who have been teaching already online and who have played around with different options for timed, untimed exams people are suggesting not to use a lockdown browser. So a lockdown browser would allow students to only look at the exam that's on Canvas or however you share it with the students in a synchronous time. Students have to download and install something for that to work, and I think this is an additional piece that students don't need right now. Again, I think if you are worried about cheating, just change your assessments so that students can't find the answer online, that they have to be creative with the language and use the language. Accommodations are crucial. Make sure that you keep reaching out to your students and encourage them to share with you if there are any accommodations that they need, more time, or maybe submitting an assessment in a different manner. You know, if they can't handwrite, let them type. If they can't type, let them handwrite. Or if they can't do X, Y, and Z, just think about different options for students to meet them where they're at. And I think also, as a reminder, just help prepare your students for this remote environment. We have a shared folder on our Google Drive that's also linked off of our preparedness website, specifically with resources for students. And there is a tip sheet on how students can succeed as a remote language learner in this environment. So that's something that you are welcome to share, adapt, retool, and share with your students. And I think something else I invite all of you to do, and this is maybe a bit of silver lining in this situation that we find ourselves in right now, think long-term. In terms of your assessments, we talked about maybe moving more toward a proficiency-oriented assessment approach. So any changes in your assessments that you make now will benefit you and your students in the future. So while you're scrambling right now to get everything online, don't think that this is work lost. I think these are valuable learning experiences for all of us with trial and error, what works and what doesn't work. So ultimately, this will really benefit ourselves and our students in the future. Just a quick reminder here, this was official communication from Cornell about changes to the schedule and prelims. The semester was extended by 1 week. And so any changes, any revisions that you make to the final schedule, to your weighting, to your syllabus, make sure that you communicate with your students about revisions, about updates, about changes. And again, the university also stresses to make accommodations to students. Here again is the schedule with the originally scheduled prelim date and the proposed alternative prelim dates. Again, you may decide to change how prelims are done altogether and maybe moving more toward this distributed and diversified model of assessment. If you make those changes, just make sure that your students are aware. So before we take questions, here is a whole list of additional resources related to assessment. Our LRC podcast, Speaking of Language, we have retooled the end of this or the remainder of this season to focus on learning and teaching in this remote environment. 2 episodes are already up. Our first one was with our colleague Chris Kaiser from Columbia, who's the manager of the Shared Course Initiative, and that focused on assessment, so you can listen to that online. We also encourage you to look at the actful can-do statements, right? As we're talking about moving more toward proficiency-oriented assessment and allowing our students to showcase what they can do, that can really be a nice guideline for you and for your students to track their move along the proficiency scale. We talked about project-based and task-based learning, and I want to draw your attention to CLEAR newsletters. So CLEAR was one of the national Title VI language resource centers. There is a brief newsletter article on can-do statements for a basic language program that might be of interest to you, and another CLEAR newsletter piece on project-based language learning. Those are like 3-page documents, so that's a very quick read. There are also 2 other current National Foreign Language Resource Center I have no idea how to pronounce the first one, LRC. It's the Assessment and Evaluation Language Resource Center that's based out of Georgetown. And then COERL is the Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning. So the first one has a lot of information on language assessment. The second one has a lot of materials that are open source for specific languages that might be of use to you. Again, just as a reminder, our Google folder for students, and of course, all the resources that we have for instructors and faculty as well. And then keep in mind that next week you can contact us at the LRC. We have open drop-ins, and this is actually a lie. This is 9:30 to 10, not to 10:30. But that's Monday to Friday, and then you can continue to schedule one-on-one individual sessions with us Monday through Friday, either at 11:30 and again at 3 p.m. And of course, we're always available on email. We're also always available to your students. If your students have any questions, they can reach out to us as well. Our final reminders here, please check in with your students on a regular basis, do wellness checks, make sure that they're okay. Be very explicit in your communication about your teaching, about your assessment, about any changes that you are making. Be kind to yourself and to your students. Try to be flexible, available, compassionate, and understanding. And most importantly, don't forget to breathe. Pat yourself on the shoulder. Your language classrooms are great as they are. The pedagogical approach to teaching in this environment and assessing in this environment really shouldn't change. The underlying principles stay the same. Just some of the strategies of how we put it into the new remote environment, that's what will need to be adjusted a little bit. Here's a link again to our preparedness website with lots of information on here. And then in the words of our dear friend Benjamin Franklin, I didn't fail the test. I just found 100 ways to do it wrong. So let's hope that this is not what our students will feel like throughout the remainder of the semester. And at this point, we are happy to take questions.